Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World, The Rundown. This is where myself and Dustin Coates. Good morning, Dustin.
Hey, Kane, how's it going?
Yes, good. Thank you. How are you?
Doing all right. Looking forward to this. This is one of my favorite times of the week, so looking forward to doing the rundown on the news.
Indeed. This is what we do. We run down the news and we'll pick out some of the... so I think the last one we did was probably a couple of weeks back, so a lot's happened since then. So we're kind of trying to slice out of the news the highlights, really, that have the biggest implications for brands, designers, and developers. So a hell of a lot's happened. There's been absolutely all sorts going on. What we're going to do throughout this episode, obviously we'll do what we always do in terms of going through the news and picking out those insights. But if you've got any news items or anything that you'd like us to discuss, or any questions that you've got that you'd like me and Dustin to answer in the next episode of The Rundown, then just head to Twitter and hit us up at VUX World, and we'll do our very best to either include those news items or answer those questions in the next episode. So let's get started. We've got the first kind of story that it's not really a story, actually. It's Adobe have published a slide deck on SlideShare, and it's talking about the state of voice assistants. And the broad trend, as you'll see in most reports, is that the adoption is rising, and it's forecast to rise even more, and that people that own smart speakers are more likely to buy a smart speaker for somebody else, and they're more likely to buy another smart speaker for themselves, and usage is growing up year on year, and it's kind of more confirmation, I suppose, that this stuff is gaining traction, Dustin.
Yeah, the interesting thing on that note that jumped out at me is that they estimate that we're getting to the tipping point of over a half of consumers owning a smart speaker after the holidays.
Wow.
Which is pretty wild if you think about it. Just a year ago, but certainly a few years back when Alexa came out and it was on back order, to having more than half of all people. This may just be in the U.S., I would assume, but more than half of people owning a smart speaker. It's pretty incredible.
It's mental. It is absolutely mental. There was a thing that I come across. There was a talk that was in, I believe this one was it was either at, I'll find the source and I'll put it in the show notes. It was either at the Yext event that happened in London this week, or it was at the Voice Amsterdam event that happened at the beginning of the week. And forgive me for not getting the source right, but there's a slide in there, and I'll find the person whose slide it was and credit them in the show notes. But essentially, this slide is looking at how many years it took various things to reach 50 million users, right? So I've got a little quiz for you here, Dustin. How long do you think it took the TV to reach 50 million users?
50 million. Let's say 20 years.
Ooh, close. 22 years.
22, all right.
What about the car?
Oh, the car, that has to be even longer, right? That's got to be, let's say, 40 years.
Ooh, 62 years. I tried to trick you there. I thought you were going to go down the scale. I thought I'd go back up the scale.
The car's a big purchase, right?
It is, yeah, that's true. And they've been around for a lot longer as well. So, okay, what about the computer, the PC?
The PC. Let's go with 12 years for that one.
Ooh, you not too bad on your tech history. 14 years, the PC.
14, wow.
All right, so second last, smartphone. How long did it take the smartphone to reach 50 million users?
Must have been 3 years tops.
Ooh, I'm going to put some sound effects in the back of this because you've done quite well here. Yeah, 3 year. Now, the big question, smart speakers. How long has it taken smart speakers to reach 50 million users?
Man. This is such a, I know I'm doing fantastic, obviously. Who can even picture 50 million? I know this is supposed to be impressive for a smart speaker, so let's go with just the year.
Oh, okay, fair enough. It's 2.5 years.
And a half. Okay, all right. So it's a little bit longer.
A little bit longer, but it's faster than smart speakers. I mentioned in the last. I'm going to get, as I said, I'll get the credit for this slide, and I'll find out hopefully where that information comes from, because I did mention it in the podcast we did with Sean Kanungo about the fact that it's rising faster than smart speakers, and I knew there was a source out there somewhere, but I couldn't find it. But yeah, there we go. So they're rising faster than smart speakers apparently.
Rising faster than smart speakers or smartphones?
Oh, sorry, smartphones. Sorry, yeah, that's right, yeah.
They're used to saying smart speakers. They just
yeah, smart speakers is just kind of etched into my my subconscious. Right. Everything's a smart speaker. When I go to sleep, I just close my eyes and it's just smart speakers all over the place.
And we don't call them smartphones anymore. They're just phones.
True that, yeah, that's true. So maybe these will just be speakers, and every speaker might be a smart speaker. Who knows? But the other thing that was interesting about that that Adobe slide deck was they've got kind of like typical use cases, or they've got kind of like a slide, and again we'll put all these links in the show notes. There's a slide that kind of highlights all of the use cases, and they've kind of broke it down into three kind of segments. So one is primary activities, and there's things in there that you'd expect. So music is one. 70% of people are using it to play music. Alarms and reminders and weather forecasts. The second chunk is called bite-sized information. This is like online search, basic searching, asking questions and asking for directions. It's more or less the standard built-in functionality that you would get on a speaker. Should we call them speakers now, or are we still on smart speakers?
Let's go with smart speakers.
We're not that far down the line yet. But then there's a third category, which is the emerging use cases. And within there, you've got things like, you've got making calls and smart home commands and stuff. But then you've got stuff like managing finances, food delivery, playing games, hotel and flight research, shopping and ordering items. And it's not wildly popular use cases. It's only 13, 17, 20% of users that were involved in this study that have said that they do that. But what it's kind of showing essentially is that the standard functionality in smart speakers is obviously being used quite a lot, but there is emerging opportunities for these third-party skills and third-party applications. Would you say that's fair, Dustin?
Yeah, I think so. There were a few things that stood out here for sure. The fact that, so I'm going to go from two different perspectives here. The fact that 13% of people already use it to manage finances is pretty incredible to me. That seems like a large number. I would assume this is probably more of that bite-sized information, more than diverts 20% of my portfolio to orange juice futures or something like that. The other thing that stood out is 20% playing games, which on this case, it actually feels a bit small. Amazon, I know, especially has put a lot of emphasis on games. And, I'm not much of a gamer for sure. But to see only 20%, and it's not very clear here if this is a one-time use, if this is regular use or what it is, but to see only 20% maybe shows that maybe the voice assistants are, at least right now, leaning a little more serious.
Yeah. I think what's also interesting is that it doesn't actually say, there's a lot of references to smart speakers, but it doesn't specifically say that everything in this is all about smart speakers. So it says that, the insights, they surveyed 1,000 customers about their usage, ownership and thoughts around voice assistant devices, with some interesting insights on smart speakers. So that would lead me to believe that it's not just solely smart speakers. So when I see stuff like 36% of people say that they make calls and 24% of people say that they send and receive text messages, that would lead me to kind of like presume that actually there is potentially increased activity around voice assistant access and usage on mobile.
Oh yeah, you'd have to imagine. I know HomePod's out right now, but I don't know how successful that's been, though. Siri on the iPhone, for all its failures in a lot of ways, is quite popular just because of being on iOS, and Google Assistant as well. You speak with people anecdotally, and more, whether they have a smart speaker or not, they're using Assistant or they're using Siri more often.
I've found myself doing that. Like, and I keep saying to people that everyone says that Siri's a load of rubbish, but I just persist with it. It's only because I've got an iPhone, so I just persist with it. And sometimes it works all right. So for calls, Siri shortcuts are fantastic because it used to, the phone numbers in my phone book, they're kind of like, so for Gemma's mum, for example, it's called, I haven't called her by her name. I've said Gemma's mum, Jane, or whatever it is. You know what I mean? So whenever I try and ring somebody, I need to remember what they're called in my phone book, and it's just a nightmare. Whereas with the shortcuts that they've introduced, you can just essentially set up. So if I want to ring Gemma, rather than saying whatever I've got it saved as, I can just say ring Gemma or whatever, and it'll do it, sort of thing. So I found myself sort of persisting with it, but it is still frustrating in times where, like this morning, we were trying to organise a call for Monday, and I asked Siri what 1 p.m. PST is in London, and it said Friday the 12th. So yeah,
it's funny how it sometimes tries to be just too clever. Sometimes I was recently searching for this baseball player. His name is Mark Appel. Appel, of course, in French is call, and my phone is both in English and French. And all of a sudden, it started calling my contact Mark. I'm like, no, that's not what I wanted. I wanted something entirely different.
That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I'm saying obviously it just takes a bit of time, I suppose. But having said that, it takes time. Siri's been around for years, hasn't it? But I don't know. Anyway, there's another. So there's things in that report around shopping, and there's another piece in Business Insider on shopping. Now there was a report a few months. Well, I say a few months. It was probably about a month ago, and I think it might have been VoiceBot that produced it. And essentially, it kind of broken down the number of people who shop via their voice, and when you break it down, it was saying something like it's largely Amazon Prime members, and compared to the number of people who've attempted it, was like something like 24% or something. I'll dig out the facts, but I can't remember the exact figures. But in terms of the number of people who've actually did it and then repeated it afterwards, was something like 2%. It was something really minute. But this study and this survey in Business Insider, and I haven't got the full report because it's about $500. But there is some highlights in there, which is saying that from the survey that they did, it was over 1,500. This is based on US shoppers, but 51% of them are saying that they're using voice assistants for researching. 36% are adding items to the shopping list. 30% are tracking a package. 22% are making a purchase. So although there may be some headlines that are telling brands that people aren't shopping on voice assistants, maybe we're not at the point where everybody's actually making the transaction, but it would certainly seem as though in and around the shopping experience, in the lead up to it and even after sales as well, there is still engagement on voice assistants and presumably opportunities, Dustin.
Yeah, and I think to completely write it off is a bit short-sighted. And, we talked about this when the original stat came out, I believe, about that small number of purchase. Again, I think on the voice assistant side, on an Alexa, an assistant, on Siri, etc., that number is going to be pretty small right now. But if you expand that again to mobile, and you look at voice being at any point of the stage, if you're a retailer, you have to consider that. It's I saw another stat that said I think a majority of retailers have voice somewhere on their roadmap by the end of 2018. So it's really going to be just sort of something that consumers expect. And we have more Alexa news, but this ties in pretty well to something that Google announced as well, which is being able to buy digital goods right there within Assistant. And not just that, but being able to do it, I believe, almost entirely through voice when paired with Google sign-in for Assistant, which allows people to sign into an action or actually sign in to a website if they use something like OAuth, which connects Google to a website. Like you see, log in with Google, log in with Facebook, all of that kind of mechanism, doing that entirely through voice. And that's something where I think that's really going to increase the number of people shopping, or at least spending money through voice. because it decreases friction. And you can see sort of that end game for Google and Amazon, because if you're adding your credit cards to Google to make it easier to shop through voice, then they're going to get a cut of it. It's going to be easy for you to spend money on Google Shopping or wherever else. They can build that into ads. They can do whatever. So I think this is a big news. I think it flew under the radar a bit with the other Google announcements, with Alexa sometimes just sort of sucking the air out of the news sometimes as the behemoth. But I think this is really big.
Yeah, because that's one of the whole concept and the whole point really of voice in many cases is that it's such a time saver and it's such a frictionless kind of medium when it's done right. And I think one of the things that certainly has kind of aggravated me in terms of some of the stuff I've been trying to do. I do a lot of testing on them, obviously, and you kind of sometimes I think you can overlook stuff sometimes when you're just kind of playing around with it and you've got no real need to use it. You're just sort of testing stuff out. You can kind of you hit roadblocks and stuff and you kind of just think, and you kind of just sort of ignore it. But when you actually want to use it and really use it to do something and get something done, one of the big pain points I've found is that kind of the sign-in part. So so Alexa or Google or whoever will kind of stop the experience, send you a link, then you need to go to the link and sign up to the website, and only once you've signed up can you then go back to the skill. I don't know whether Domino's has improved, but that was what happened with the Domino's skill, is that you'd start the experience and you couldn't really go any further until you've kind of authenticated and logged into your Domino's account, but you had to do that on your mobile, so it all got a little bit clunky and disjointed. But this potentially is a huge step forward to make all of that seamless.
Yeah, and I don't know how much of this is the end game, but if a system really takes off even more than it already is, and all of these brands are on it, if all these brands are on Alexa, there's incentive for them to then add that sign in with Amazon or pay with Amazon or sign in with Google to their websites and their mobile apps as well, so that those accounts are already joined for the user. And that further expands the reach, that further expands the data that both of those companies have, because now they not only know what you're doing on Assistant, but they also know what other websites you're a member of every time that you sign in.
That presumably, that will probably get in more into the privacy side of things, I suppose. But having said that, if you're signing in with Google, then presumably you're authenticating with Google, so you're obviously open to share that data. But I'm wondering whether that has any kind of implications for almost. So we talk about multimodal all the time, and if you ask for something with your voice, you might get it visually, or you might ask for something in your headphones and it'll play back in your smart speaker, or whatever that kind of whatever that experience is. This almost has the potential to join that up, doesn't it? For example, you could potentially, if you signed into your smart speaker with Google and you use for example, a podcast skill through Google Action, through Google Assistant, and then if you've already signed in through Google there and you've signed into the podcast app through Google on your phone, then you're in the realms of being able to stop playing the podcast on your smart speaker and continue playing it from where you left off on your phone.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the other news that we saw this week really goes to show that at least these companies think that multimodal is the future. I think what I'm thinking of is two news. One fairly small, which is this AVS dev kit for set-top boxes. So AVS Alexa voice service, it allows people to put Alexa into devices, and they're just releasing this dev kit for set-top boxes, cable boxes, TV boxes especially. I know Amazon's moving into this, Google's moving into this. From a company perspective, from a cable company, I'm not sure how comfortable I would be inviting them in, because they are quite directly competing with those companies. But sometimes I think the consumers really drive that demand. But another piece of news as well, which a lot more attention, was the release of the Google Home Hub, which we spoke about on the last rundown, I believe. But this is another device with a screen, I guess you can call it, a voice first device with a screen, competing very directly with the Echo Show, and competing a little bit with another device that we'll talk about a little bit later that was released from a third company altogether. But this one was interesting because a low price point, $149, compared to, I don't remember the Echo Show. I think it's closer to maybe 200. It's been a while since I purchased mine. But also no camera on there as well. What did you make of the Home Hub? Are you going to buy one? Are you going to add one to your home?
I think over time, I'll hopefully, this is the way I'd see it going, is that my office will just be full of all of these things for the sake of exploring them. In terms of having it to use in the house, I like the idea of it. I just wonder whether the camera will end up or the lack of a camera will end up holding it back a little bit. But it's definitely a step towards, another step towards the multimodal thing. And you said that we mentioned it last time on the rundown, that it was a rumor when we mentioned it, but then it was announced a couple of days ago. But yeah, I think what you were saying is right in terms of it's another kind of step towards a multimodal future, I suppose. And I think that we mentioned this again on the rundown, and I suspect that this is going to be something that we profess from here on out probably constantly, and people are probably going to get sick and tired of hearing us saying it, but voice first or voice only is obviously still always going to be there and still going to increase and rise in terms of its adoption and its potential. But if you have an action or a skill, if you've got one in development, or if you're considering getting involved in kind of beginning that journey, then I think the earlier you can start playing around and testing with multimodal experiences, and the more you can learn about it at this stage, it will stand you in a good stead entirely. Because I can see, you've got that AVS available for set-top boxes. You've got Amazon releasing the new version of the Echo Show. You've got Fire TV. You've got a whole swathe of announcements that Alexa announced a few weeks back, which is all screen kind of. A lot of them are screen, come with a screen. So I can kind of imagine that everything becomes more fluid, doesn't it? So it doesn't really matter where you are, what you're doing. There's a device near you that will be able to handle whatever it is that you need. So the kind of example I was giving when I was speaking to a few people over the last few weeks is that if you can imagine just sitting in your front room, and this is becoming in handy for me while I'm sitting there feeding the baby, and I almost wish I had this, is that, when it comes to either shopping or content, speaking to Alexa, speaking to Google, but then having things displayed either on your TV, for example, and then being able to continue the experience through your TV. It's almost like you've got interactive TV, you've got interactive stories, you've got, interactive shopping, whereby you'll potentially be speaking to an actual shop assistant almost, as you can kind of browse through the product offering. So this is obviously very, very early days, and it's easy to just imagine where it can go. But I think that the early signs are that multimodal and screen and voice together are certainly going to become more and more apparent. And as I say, the earlier that people can start thinking about incorporating that into their existing skills, the better.
Yeah. I think you're spot on. The screen is going to be so important. And in fact, there's the third device that we alluded to, which is pretty much just all screen, which is Facebook Portal. What about that one? Is that one finding a place in your home, Karen?
It won't find a place in my home, I don't think. To be totally honest, I stopped using Facebook probably about 2 years ago, 3 years ago maybe, because it started getting just a bit ridiculous. It was either full of content that I wasn't bothered about anymore, or it was full of, like, as soon as your mum and your grandma ends up on Facebook, it starts becoming a time when you need to start thinking about moving elsewhere, because it's a bit intense. You're posting something up there that you think is really cool and hip, and then your mum comments on it with a little smiley face and says, "I remember when you wanted this when you were 3-year-old." But I've started using it a bit more recently because there is a good voice community on there, so I've kind of have been engaging with it a little bit more. But back to the portal, I think that probably because I don't use Facebook that often, my sort of network is spread across many different networks. I don't know whether or not I'd specifically get value from it. However, it does have Alexa built in. It does have a pretty decent looking camera. So for my personal opinions don't really matter, to be honest, because I think from a branding perspective, I think the opportunities with that will be quite vast, providing Facebook can get over the hurdle of the privacy stuff that's been going on recently. But what about you? Is this going to find a place in your kitchen?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, if Facebook wants to send me one for free, then I'll consider it. But I just don't have. I have no need for this one. I actually bought my wife's parents an Echo Show last Christmas, I believe, and my wife uses it every single weekend to call them from France to Texas.
Wow.
With that video capability. So I can see that being really interesting. And the Portal, especially the Portal Plus, it's a beautiful device, but it just feels too late. Facebook has this reputation now of not caring about privacy, and certainly they put some privacy controls in there. And in fact, there's a physical camera cover, so I think they know what the reputation is, obviously. But I can't see this being very successful. I could be proven wrong, but how many people are on Facebook today and are saying, I really want just a Facebook specific device?
It seems to be kind of, so, Facebook as a platform and as a company from a sort of brand perspective, it is obviously huge. You've got Facebook advertising, which is, the targeting on Facebook advertising is unbelievable. You've got kind of Instagram and WhatsApp wrapped up within there, and Facebook Messenger is incredibly useful for brands and getting more and more popular with users, same as WhatsApp, and the WhatsApp business chat that they're in beta with right now has huge potential. So it's I mean, from a consumer perspective, I don't know whether or not there is going to be a huge need for it, because how often do you video call people? Maybe it's once a day if you're really kind of active with video calling, potentially, in terms of friends and family and not kind of business. So from a consumer perspective, it's a bit of a weird one. From a business perspective, it's easy to imagine that Facebook Messenger would be able to be rolled out into this, and WhatsApp could be incorporated into it, and then you'd have a hands-free messaging kind of thing with a screen, which is another multimodal voice and screen-based thing, which it could turn into. And so you can see that it could turn into something, and with that could come opportunities for brands to extend their WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger presence across into this environment and incorporate visuals into it and whatnot. It's just, I think that you need the consumer adoption before you even consider doing stuff like that, and that's where I'm a little bit unsure about on this one.
Yeah, time will tell. Time will tell for sure. I'd be interested in hearing from our listeners as well. Tweet at us, tell us if you think Portal is going to be a success, or you think it's going to be a short-lived experiment from Facebook.
Yeah, do that, and we'll read some of the comments out in the next episode. Tweet at VUX World, and we'll read out some of your comments next time. Before we wrap up, then, there's a couple of other interesting Alexa things going on. There's two. One quick one we'll do is the Alexa for Business has announced room bookings. So now if you use Alexa for Business, or if you don't use Alexa for Business, then you've got another reason to consider using it, because there's an API available now which will enable you to essentially, you can build a voice first booking system for your company, which I can see that being an incredibly interesting use case, providing it can work seamlessly. You've already got things on Amazon Alexa for Business rather, where you can if you say start the meeting or what have you, you can pull up your slides, and you can find your documents and whatnot. You can get things done a lot quicker. But now, Dustin, you can also book rooms.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. This is another one where I know people are doing it, but I know a lot of businesses are also really wary of bringing Amazon on board. Amazon competes with nearly everyone, or if they don't today, they will soon. And so inviting Amazon in from this kind of perspective, I'm not sure. I think people are going to be wary. and I'm not. This is a case where I'm not actually sure how much voice adds. So they're working with Joan, they're working with Robin. Here we use Robin. I know plenty of people who use Joan. You put it on. We put it actually on Fire tablets, and it works well. You go and you can see at a glance if the room is available. You don't need to speak to it. It seems like adding voice just to add voice in this one. What do you think, Kane?
I think that if you're stood outside the room, then I think obviously a visual display is a lot better. But I think that if you're sitting at your desk, then being able to say, Alexa, book me a meeting room for 3 people on Thursday at 10, and then just have that understand which rooms are available at the appropriate size for 3 people, and make that booking for you. I think that's where the value is, because you can get that done without having to do a load of clicking around and messing about trying to find rooms, which is always a bit of a, especially if you don't have a booking system that has the intelligence to do that. If you say I just want a one-to-one with 2 people, and you want a space to do that in, then there's no point in booking out a room for 12 people, which could be used for 12 people if they needed it. So if you can incorporate that kind of functionality into it, and you can extend it, because most of the examples that they've given here in this release, and it's not out yet, it's coming soon to beta, but the example kind of phrases that they're given is, Alexa, book this room for half an hour, and Alexa, is this room free, and Alexa, who booked this room? So it kind of leads me to believe that you need to be stood where the room is, talking to an Echo that's hooked up to that one particular room. So if that's the case, then I think you're right. I think that it might be a little bit of an overkill, because and as well as that, you will need an Echo for every single room, which it's not wildly expensive, but it's still but if it is the extension of being able to just sit there and just ask Alexa to book a room for X many people on X many day, on whatever day it is, then I can see the use for that 100%. But I'm not sure whether that's what this is.
Yeah, you just gave me this nightmare-ish image of open floor plans where everybody's talking to their computers nonstop. I hope that's not our future for sure, but this will be another interesting one to see how much. And they already have starting video calls within rooms, so this seems like a natural add-on there.
Yeah, we'll see how that one goes. And the last one then, the last story we've got today is all around skill-to-skill connections. So, I mean, I'm surprised that I know that it's kind of flown the way it's flown this, but this is quite a interesting announcement, this, and it's maybe, whether it's saving the best to last, that I don't really know, but it certainly does intrigue me a hell of a lot. So, this announcement essentially is that you can essentially join 2 skills together. So they've released 5 types of connections. So you can use, for example, images, PDF, web page. There's something to do with food establishments and taxi reservations. So through connecting skills together, or if you enable your skill to be connected to another skill, then the use case that they give the example of here is, for example, you could book a food reservation at a restaurant through the skill, and at the same time, through that skill would connect to the Uber skill, for example, and reserve you a taxi to pick you up to take you there. And there's things around, it's on about printing as well. So, for example, if you might book a train ticket via Virgin, but then you could print that ticket out via the Epson skill, all in one interaction, all at the same time. I'm sure that the use cases for this will extend, and it sounds quite interesting, but it sounds quite. What do you think, Dustin, on that one?
Yeah, I think 2 things are interesting. One is that people still own printers, apparently. I haven't met anyone who does, but
not for a long time.
Some of our listeners out there have a printer in their home, which, congratulations for maintaining their retrofill. The other interesting thing, of course, is that it is quite scoped. This is something that people have been asking for, I think, and certainly thinking about for a while, and they're not just opening it up to everything. That seems interesting at first, but then once you start thinking about it, it gets quite messy. Because if you hand it off from one skill to another skill, and then that skill hands it off who's answering at the end of the day, who's really responsible, which skill is responsible for that. And so because you have just these 5 connections, or really just 2, printing and scheduling, it makes it a little bit more clear what can happen. And I think this is often what the Alexa team does, is it opens up to very small use cases and then expands it. So I can easily see us having more than just these 5 down the line if this is successful.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. I think that, you're going to start small and test it with a few specific ideal use cases, aren't you? But I think it does sound interesting. I'd wonder how you would, as a user, how you would go about setting that up. I think from a skill developer's perspective or from a brand perspective, it's interesting because you can essentially enhance your customer experience by handling another request or handing them off in the right place to another request or place where you can fulfill your request. So it's almost, it makes the whole experience a lot more kind of, I don't know whether it is seamless because I haven't tried it, but it makes it a lot more rounded, and you can fulfill a whole suite of actions at one time. So it sounds good from a kind of brand perspective, what the potential might be. I just wonder how you would go about actually setting that up from a user, whether the skill itself will suggest that, for example. So once you've booked that restaurant, does it suggest that you book a taxi via Uber? And if so, then potentially, this could be the first step towards a whole world of referrals and things like that, which could be, depending on how Amazon roll it out, if it does go that way, it could be potentially exciting.
Yeah, that was my first question, is if I choose the Uber skill over the Lyft skill, am I going to get a kickback from Uber or not? That's what's interesting to me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Interesting. We'll see how that one plays out. That's it's all a bit unclear. Even the post that announced it is a very short piece. It's probably only 400 words or so. So I think it sounds as though it's pretty early, but the potential for that is pretty good. So we'll see how that unfolds. So yeah, there we go. That's the rundown. There's kind of a lot been going on recently. I think we've covered a few decent announcements in this episode. As Dustin mentioned, let us know what you think of the Facebook portal device and whether it's something that you will be going for or not, and what you think the potential is for it. And also, if you've got any other questions for me and Dustin that you'd like us to answer in the next episode, let us know. And alternatively, any news stories as well that you'd like us to discuss, just tweet us all of that at VUX World. Dustin, this has been a good one.
Yeah, I think it really has. Looking forward to the next one already.